Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Week 3 of our season previews continues this week. On our game day segment, we'll be joined by beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic. Before he joins us, let's get started as we always do with a few of my thoughts. I do enjoy hearing from those of you who take time to email me with your thoughts on the upcoming season. Fan opinion on this Michigan team and their coach is really all over the map. There is a segment of our fan base that just wants Jim gone. They are done waiting. Then you have another segment of fans saying if we don't win a Big Ten championship in year 7 of the Harbaugh era, it's time to move on from Jim. There is also a contingent of fans that don't care either way. They just love Michigan and will support them no matter what. As I said, there is quite a diversity of opinion. I think it's safe to say we all agree this is another big year. The way Jim's new contract is structured gives Warden Manuel a lot of room to maneuver if the wheels come off. Now, winning a Big Ten championship is something no one that covers this team thinks will happen. I can actually envision us winning 9 or 10 games, though, if our quarterback play is very good, if our offense is very, very good, and if our defense is better than most critics think. A lot of ifs there. As the late great Bobby Ufer used to say, if this, if that iffy bag gets pretty heavy to carry around sometimes. Wherever you fall on the spectrum, you really won't know anything about this team until they tee it up in September. I'm still excited about the season, though. Things have to turn eventually, knock on wood. There may not be a Big Ten championship in the cards this year, but if we can win 9 or 10 games and compete with Ohio State, maybe even beat them, I would be encouraged about our near-term future. My guest today says he can see Michigan winning 5 games, or even 10. There are so many question marks surrounding this team, it's virtually impossible to know if we are average or on the verge of becoming a very good football team. Beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic is up next on this week's edition of The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on this week's Game Day segment as we continue our previews of the fast approaching season is Austin Meek from The Athletic. Once again, Austin, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Well, Austin, we're just, as we have talked about, weeks away from another big season of Michigan football, college football. And once again, I think we say this every year, it's a pivotal one for Jim Harbaugh. His contract is long-term. But it's written in such a way that if the wheels come off again, God forbid, it could be his last year, he needs to change the direction of the program. And from all we saw in the offseason, he really does get that, doesn't he?
Yeah, the way I put it going into this season is that I think this is either going to be Jim Harbaugh's second act at Michigan or his last stand.
Yeah.
And I think it could go either way. If the wheels come off this season, after the way the 2020 season went, then it's going to be really hard to see a real bright future for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. But he's done a lot of things in the offseason, from his coaching staff to the recruiting department to the roster. It's been almost a total changeover with the exception of the head coach. If we see progress this year, if we can see those moves beginning to pay off, then maybe we'll look back at this season and say it was the start of Jim Harbaugh reinventing himself at Michigan and going on to his second act, whatever that looks like.
Well, as a product of Jim's New Deal, as you just mentioned, numerous coaching changes were made, many of them interesting, but hiring young Mike Macdonald as the new DC was probably the most intriguing. We don't know if he can bring immediate improvement. That, might be asking too much. But his defense, according to reports, because we have not seen it yet, will be much different from a philosophy standpoint than Don Brown's, Austin.
Yeah, everything we've heard about Mike Macdonald's defense is the goal is to be unpredictable, to keep the offense guessing, to bring pressure from different angles, different places on the field, and to keep the offense guessing. And that was one criticism of Don Brown's defense, is that, Don had a specific thing that he wanted to do. He wanted to be aggressive. He wanted to play a lot of man coverage, and people knew that, and they knew how to attack Don Brown's defense. And right now, I don't think anybody really knows how to attack Mike Macdonald's defense because we haven't seen it. Mm-hmm. The players still need to execute, and I think it's definitely there's definitely some risk involved in making such a drastic change. And as you mentioned, it may not look great on day one, but I think the hope is that the defense that Michigan is running now is just going to be a little more flexible, going to be able to show some different looks depending on what the offense is throwing at you, and is going to be able to mix things up a little more than the defense that Michigan has run the past few years.
Well, the most striking aspect of the coaching changes, at least to me, was the age of the new staffers. I think in spring, 10 of them were still under 40. Jim said that was not by design. He was just trying to bring in the best coaches he could hire. But getting younger and changing the program culture, among other reasons, sure leads you to believe the move to a younger staff was, if not by design, sure seemingly a good move.
Yeah, I think one thing that I came away with from last year, talking to a bunch of different people, is that season last year just was not much fun for anybody, which makes sense. Michigan was 2-4. They were dealing with the COVID protocols that really affected daily life, players in quarantine, players in contact tracing, players out with the virus. So nothing about last season really was enjoyable for anybody. And I think I have a strong feeling that coming out of that season, Jim Harbaugh recognized that he needed to change the energy in some way. And by bringing in some younger coaches who could connect with the players in a different way, I think he saw that as a way to change the energy that everybody saw last season. So, yeah, I think, you think about a guy like Mike Hart, you think about a guy like Ron Bellamy, you think about Steve Klinkscale, who they hired from Kentucky, who's really popular with the players. It clearly was an attempt to build that chemistry in the building between the coaches and the players in a way that we didn't necessarily see last year.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those new hires that you just mentioned. Mike Hart, a fan favorite for Michigan alums and the fan base, was seen as a great hire, I think. He did a great job down in Bloomington, earned a reputation for developing talent, and was basically, from all reports I've heard and read, Coach Allen's right-hand man, especially in the locker room. It's going to be really interesting to see how he develops this young backfield, isn't it?
Yeah, when Mike Hart got into coaching, I think you had to know that at some point this day was probably going to come.
Yeah.
A player who had the career that he had at Michigan, that pull to eventually come back and coach at Michigan was going to be pretty irresistible, and it was just a question of when Mike Hart was going to end up back here. And look, it's definitely, there's some different layers to it. From Jim Harbaugh's perspective, to bring back a player who was, so beloved. I mean, in one sense, it's a slam dunk, but still, it's there's just a lot to it. There's pressure on Mike Hart to come back because people remember him as he was, as a player, and he's not coming into the easiest situation. It's not like Michigan is coming off a Rose Bowl. So, there's pressure on all of these new coaches who have come in to get things turned around quickly. But I just think that the reputation that Mike Hart has in the state, the reputation he has in the coaching community made this just a slam dunk hire. The move that you look at, the one move from this offseason and say, well, you couldn't have made a better hire than that for that position.
No, I completely agree with you on that. But another great hire that it seems most football observers around the country thought was a a great move was bringing Steve Klinkscale in. A lot of folks considered that brilliant. He's considered a home run hire too, isn't he?
I think there was some surprise initially when Jim Harbaugh filled out his staff, and Steve Klinkscale wasn't part of it because he had such a reputation when he was at Kentucky for recruiting the state of Michigan. He'd been a thorn in the side of Michigan and Michigan State, a guy who really brought all of the things that it seemed like Jim Harbaugh was looking for when he decided to overhaul his staff. But, the guy they hired instead, Maurice Linguist, brought a lot of those traits as well and seemed to be really popular with the players up until the point that he left for Buffalo. So to me, the great part about that is in a situation that could have been a big negative for Michigan, they actually spun it into a positive to be able to get Steve Klinkscale and get it done in just a few days when Maurice Linguist left unexpectedly. I think that was a real confidence builder, I think, from a situation that could have ended up being a negative.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to see how all of these young coaches mesh in just a few months, and we're not going to have to wait long to find out. Another storyline to watch this fall is that of what happens with the offense under the direction of a third-year offensive coordinator, Josh Gaddis. Now, he received an extension. He has plenty of weapons to work with. For this year's team to be successful, especially as the defense develops, that offense has to be good, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the offense is going to have to carry the team at times because you just expect that the defense is going to have some growing pains. And the offense, as you mentioned, now it's year 3 for Josh Gaddis as the offensive coordinator. Really at every position on that offense, you have guys coming back who you would think about as leaders of the team. So, yeah, I think that offense needs to be good. I think it needs to be one of the top 3 or 4 offenses in the Big Ten. And I think that is attainable. I don't know if they'll get there. They do have some questions to answer in some different places. But I think that the talent is there on that offense to take a pretty big step forward. And I think they need to because, last year for Josh Gaddis, you don't throw it out completely. There's some value in analyzing what happened last year, but it certainly wasn't a normal season. But now he's going into year 3, and really, to me, there's no excuses for this offense not to be pretty good this year.
No, I think everyone agrees with that. On that offense, we talked a few minutes ago about all of the new young coaches that have come on board, but Sharon Moore has moved over to the offensive line, taking over for Ed Warner. And other than who is under center as we approach this season, that position group, the big guys in the trenches, needs to lead the way for this offense from day one, doesn't it, Austin?
Well, certainly that's always where it starts for your offense. That was also, I think, a big part of why Michigan's offense struggled so much last year was the flux that they had on their offensive line. So, yeah, if this offense is going to take a step forward, that offensive line needs to be better. They've got some guys that I think they're really excited about. Zach Zenter has such a bright future and is so valuable because of his versatility and the ability to play center, to play guard. Ryan Hayes, he got hurt last year, so we didn't really get to see him much, but there's been excitement for him going back a couple years to when he first got on the field. Andrew Stuber has just been a rock for Michigan during his whole career, has played a lot of football, so you feel good about him. And then it's just a matter of some of the younger guys, a guy like Trevor Keegan, Carson Barnhart. Are those guys ready to step in and really take ownership of their jobs and really pull that offensive line together? If they are, I think that group has the potential to be really good. But they definitely need to bounce back from last year because they just had so much transition last year, so many guys in and out of the lineup, and it just never really clicked.
As a group, they're somewhat lacking in experience, but what's nice is there's quite a bit of depth there, which is always good.
Yeah, I think they've got quite a few guys who are third-year players from that 2019 class, and not many of them have played a lot of football, but they're at the point in their careers now where it's time for them to make an impact. And you would expect that after a couple of years of waiting in the wings that those guys would be ready. And I think that the depth is better. I like the overall talent level of the group. I just think until you really see it on the field, it's hard to predict. So a guy like Trente Jones, who we've heard about in camp this year at right tackle, somebody who hasn't played a lot but still has a bright future ahead of him. This is the time when you would expect to see that, and you would expect that even if Trente Jones isn't a starter coming out of camp, that he's a guy where if somebody goes down, you should be able to plug him in, and he should be able to not miss a beat. So having guys like that in your twos and your threes, I think makes you feel a lot better about where this offensive line is.
Well, I know my listeners are probably wondering, hey, when are they going to talk about the quarterback situation? Because it seems like most of my email revolves around that question. So let's get to that one, Austin. Cade McNamara was named the starting quarterback coming out of spring ball, which was surprising to a lot of us, especially during the Harbaugh era. He's danced around that question, who's your starter, even when it was obvious. BTN was in town on Friday, and they got to see the team work out, saw the scrimmage. They said, it was Jerry DiNardo that said Cade McNamara took all of or most of the snaps with the number 1 unit. Would you be surprised if it was anyone else but Cade in the opener against Western Michigan?
Yeah, at this point, I would be really surprised. I keep waiting for one indication that something might be changing with this quarterback depth chart, and I just haven't seen it. I haven't heard it. At no point since the spring when Michigan and Jim Harbaugh and Matt Weiss came out, pretty directly and said, Cade's our number 1 quarterback. Since then, I haven't seen or heard anything that would make me think that has changed or that it's going to change before the first game. I do think that clearly Michigan felt like the right thing to do for this team and this season was to really put their faith in the guy who was the returning veteran, the leader, the guy who's respected in the locker room, and not to have a situation where potentially players are divided or fans are divided. Obviously a guy like J.J. McCarthy, as a 5-star player, there's so much hype on him coming in from high school. And if this was, an open quarterback competition right now, that would be a lot to put on a guy in JJ's position. So I get it. I think clearly the thought has been, look, Cade McNamara won this job last year, took it away from Joe Milton. He deserves to be the starter, and he's earned it again in the spring and so far in camp. And so I do think he's going to be the guy on the field, and I think it's going to be his job as long as he's playing well. But I also know if the offense struggles or if Cade McNamara struggles, there's a couple guys on the team who can play quarterback and may get a shot at some point during the season.
One of the other position groups we are focused on is that running back room. The 3 names we hear mentioned the most are Hassan Haskins. You would expect he would be the number 1 guy. Blake Corum, who we saw quite a bit of last year. And then freshman Donovan Edwards, of course, a 4-star, 5-star, gets a lot of talk. Those appear to be the 3 guys, again, that we hear the most about. And even though we haven't seen Donovan play yet at all, it sure looks like a good group, doesn't it?
I think it's the strongest position on the team. I did a ranking of those last week, and I had running back number 1 because I think that it's the best blend of any position on the team of talent and experience. There's some positions on the team where there's a lot of talent, and there's some positions on the team where there's a lot of experience. But running back to me is the spot where that all comes together, because you've got a guy like Hassan Haskins who basically has produced every time he's touched the football. He forced his way onto the field a couple of years ago when not a lot of people were talking about him. And every time he was out there, he made a case that he needed to get carries. And that's been true of him basically throughout his career. And it's going to be true this year, even though maybe on paper he's not the most talented running back they've got in that room, but I expect him at the end of the day to be the guy who gets the most carries, because he's got that experience and he's proven it. But I think Blake Corum is going to be right there with him. If there's a guy that that I would peg on the offense as the number one breakout candidate, whatever you want to call it, probably be Blake Corum, because we saw just a taste of what he can do last year. But, he really brings a different skill set from Hassan Haskins, which is great, to have two backs who are different stylistically and can bring different things to the field. That's great to have that. And then you throw Donovan Edwards into the mix, and it seems like he's kind of a combination of everything. Speed, power, strength, agility. He can kind of do all of that. So I really like this running back group. I think Josh Gaddis feels like going into the season that this is where Michigan really needs to hang its hat on these guys in the backfield. And I do expect the running game to really be a strength of the offense and really be the position group that leads the way for this team.
And with Mike Hart handling the group in his first year, this is interesting to watch, I think, because at IU, he pretty much was the kind of coach that liked a bell cow back. Here for the last several years, especially with Josh, he likes to use those three backs. A lot of the fans are, will bellyache about that. We can't get a rhythm established in the backfield when you have three guys playing. But as you mentioned, I think sometimes that's true, but you have three very different kind of backs. So in this situation, and everything is situational, having three different weapons is incredible.
Yeah, last year they were trying to use four when you put Chris Evans and Zach Charbonnet in the mix. And it is true that last year, I don't think anybody really felt like it clicked. Zach Charbonnet's at UCLA now. Chris Evans is in the NFL. So I think based on what we heard from Josh Gaddis earlier in camp, I think that it's going to narrow a little bit. I think it's going to be three guys this year, which I think three is a little more manageable than four. And I think, Josh Gaddis used that phrase, bell cow, to describe what they want Hassan Haskins to be, which tells me that, you're talking about 12 to 15 carries a game for a guy, who has that label. So I think that it's probably going to evolve a little bit to having Hassan Haskins as more of the lead back, especially if, he continues to produce at the level that he has throughout his career. But yeah, they're still going to play multiple guys. You need to play more than one back in the Big Ten, and they've got the talent to do that. So they need to use their top three guys. But I do think that we'll see maybe a little shift for the number one back to get a little higher percentage of the carries.
Well, the receiving core has been one of potential the last few years. Wide out, slot guys, and tight ends all lumped together there. Other than Ronnie Bell, though, there has not been really any consistency from the receiving core over the last few seasons. But that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of speed and talent in that room. We need to see some of those guys move past that potential label this season, though, don't we, Austin?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. When you get past Ronnie Bell, and I would put Cornelius Johnson right there with Ronnie as number one, number two in some order. But after that, it's kind of wide open. And I think we do need to see somebody in that group, whether it's Mike Sainristil, A.J. Henning, Roman Wilson, Dalen Baldwin, coming in from Jackson State. One of my questions about this team is, at the end of the year, who's going to be number three in receptions and receiving yards? Because I think if I had to put money on it, I'd bet Ronnie Bell and Cornelius Johnson are 1 and 2. But I don't really know who's number three. Could be Dalen Baldwin, could be A.J. Henning, could be Mike Sainristil. But I think somebody needs to seize that. I think they feel good that they've got like 6 guys that they can play in that receiving group, which is good. But I think you also need, you need the cream to rise to the top. And I think if somebody really goes out there and makes a case that, hey, I'm right there with Ronnie and Cornelius, I'm playing at that level, then I think that would be great for Michigan. But it's just a matter of, somebody's got to go out there and do it.
Oh, absolutely. It's an interesting position group to watch this year. As we mentioned earlier, BTN was in town on Friday to watch practice and the scrimmage. And I think what surprised me just a bit was what they said about the defensive line, that they liked the size and the athletic ability of the D-line when they were here. And that is one position group most of us are worried about or have been since spring. And there are a lot of question marks surrounding that defensive line, aren't there, Austin?
I think the defensive line is probably the biggest gap between the talent level on paper and the perception of the group as a whole, because the measurables and the talent level on paper is really good. You know, you've got a guy like Chris Hinton, who was a top 50 player, 5-star recruit. Got Mozzie Smith, who was a 4-star guy, borderline top 100 player. So there's talent in that defensive line group. And the fact that, you know, we do tend to talk about it as one of the big question marks on the team, I think indicates that, you know, Michigan hasn't been able to maximize the talent that they've got at that position, and that's probably part of the reason that, you know, there's a new scheme and a new defense here. So to me, that's part of the question for Mike Macdonald is, can you unlock the potential of some of these guys who have been on the roster, you know, who are at the point in their careers like Mozzie Smith, who he's a third-year player. It's go time for him. And everything that we've heard about Mozzie from spring is that he's really seized that. And if he comes out and he anchors the middle of that defensive line and becomes, you know, he doesn't have to be an every down player, but a guy who's on the field a lot and makes plays, I think the potential is there for this defensive line to go from being a weakness to being a strength of this team. But it's another one of those positions where you got to see it. We've heard it so far, and now we just have to see it on the field.
Yeah, I think you can say the same thing about the linebackers. I'm not sure what to expect from those guys. I'm not sure if the staff even is quite sure yet, Austin. On paper, it looks like a pretty good group, not a lot of depth, but talent. Maybe not great. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, you know, the things that you like about this linebacker group, number one, you love having a guy like Josh Ross, who's a fifth-year senior, has played a lot of football, is a leader for that group. I think of him kind of as a tone setter for the defense. So you love having his voice and his experience in the middle. Michael Barrett, his versatility, a guy who played the Viper spot in Don Brown's defense, showed last year, I think, just the different things that he could do. He could come off the edge and get to the quarterback. He could play out in space. He can do different things. It sounds like this role will put him in the box a little more. You know, he'll be playing inside linebacker. He won't be doing as much of the safety responsibilities that came with the Viper position.
Mm-hmm.
So with those two guys, I think you have two pretty solid players to put in the middle of that defense. But, you know, I do think that there are some limitations with that linebacker group. Depth is one of the limitations. You know, experience behind the two starters is definitely a question mark, because if Josh Ross or Michael Barrett gets hurt, you're going to be playing a guy there who doesn't have a lot of experience. And that's got to be a concern going into it. So I don't think it's going to be the strength of the defense by any means, but I think if the top two guys stay healthy and bounce back a little bit to what, you know, in Josh Ross's case, maybe what we saw in 2019 before he got hurt, then I think that group could be really solid for sure.
Well, I feel pretty good about the secondary. Of course, we've got Daxton Hill and Brad Hawkins back there. The corners, as we saw last year, they need to play better than they did in that 6-game COVID schedule. They are the strength of the defense, I guess is what I want to say. Right now, shoring up the cornerback play is job number one, but overall, that group looks good.
Yeah, you have your safety group, which to me is as strong as any position, certainly on the defense, with Daxton Hill and Brad Hawkins. And then you have your corner group, which is, to me, the single biggest question on the team. And so, you know, it's an interesting mix for Steve Klingscale and Ron Bellamy. you're right. That corner group just have to play better. That was the biggest, most glaring weakness with the defense last year was the corner play. And it's basically the same group of guys now trying to play in a different scheme and hopefully have a different result this year. We've heard good things about DJ Turner, that he may have the inside track to start at corner along with Jamon Green, which maybe that ends up being an upgrade or at least a different look there at corner. And hopefully, I think the thought is that Michigan won't have to put quite as much on the corners in this scheme. They'll have a little more support. They're not going to be out on an island as much. And so, I think that'll help everybody, because a guy like Daxton Hill, he needs to be a difference maker. Another guy, a third-year player, former 5-star recruit, has played well for Michigan, but hasn't necessarily hit that, that star level, right? Where he's making a big play in every game, where he's changing the game. And I think that that's attainable for him, and especially if this defense can put him in positions to be around the ball and make those plays. I think that can cover up for a lot. If you got a safety back there who can do a bunch of different things, that can make your whole defense look a lot better. And hopefully Dax Hill is that guy for Michigan this year.
Well, like you mentioned, everyone is back for the most part in that secondary and at the corners. And I know you can try to improve technique, can improve wheels on the corners, but it leads you to believe with Mike McDonald coming in, I'm guessing we're going to see a lot more zone this year, Austin.
That's been the vibe that we've picked up. When we talked to Steve Klinkscale, he basically said, we're going to do a little bit of everything. We're going to play some man, going to play some cover 3, going to do some of the pattern matching stuff. I do think that'll help the corners to not be as exposed. But it's also, there's a lot to learn. I mean, Michigan played zone last year. When things started to go bad, Don Brown played some zone, and we saw why Don Brown didn't play a lot of zone, because it didn't look great. So part of it is, it's not just a willingness to play it, it's also the ability to coach it in a way that it's effective. Because if it's obviously your number 2 pitch, the thing that you don't do as well, then teams are probably going to be able to pick it apart. But if they can get to a point where they can do all of those different things and do them all pretty well, then that makes this a much tougher defense to attack than what we saw last year.
Well, whatever happens this year, at least it's going to be good to have fans back in the stadium and a return to a normal, we hope, game day atmosphere. It's going to be interesting to see, especially starting with Western Michigan, if the big house is packed for the opener, Austin.
Yeah, what I've heard so far, season ticket sales were pretty close to where they were before the pandemic, which I think is encouraging. People are starting to feel like it's safe now to go out and do more things, which is nice to see. I know we're all going into it with a degree of caution that every time you think that we're getting back to normal, it seems like we realize, no, we still gotta deal with this a little bit longer. So can't make any guarantees about things, but just to see fans in the stands again after covering games at Michigan Stadium when it was completely empty, that's going to be nice for me. I'm excited to get back in the press box and look out there and see the fans in the stands, because it's really not the same without them.
No, we're all excited about that. So we'll see. We still have a few weeks to go, and with that Delta variant, you've been hearing from different quarters of the country, from different universities, there might be some masks required or requested, but we haven't heard that yet from Michigan, have we?
No, I don't think as of right now there's been any announcement on that. As more people get vaccinated, that seems to be the key to being able to get back to a lot of these things that we enjoy. And I know the team vaccination rate it's close to 100%, 98 point something,
right.
And the full staff is vaccinated. So from the team perspective, I think they're in good shape, and hopefully that's true the fan base as well, and we can get back to doing a lot of these things that we really missed last year.
Oh, knock on wood. Well, final question before we let you get away, Austin. In the preseason magazines that have been out spring and summer, it seems like most of them, when you average things out, are pegging Michigan with about a 7-5 record, maybe 8 wins if we get improved quarterback play and better than expected defense. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that feels right to me. In various places, I think I've picked Michigan to go 7-5 or 8-4. You know, I think the potential is there to get to that 9 or 10 win range. I think a lot of things would have to go right, but I do think that there's the talent on this team to get there. And on the other side of that, if things don't go well, I could see this being more like a 6-6 or a 5-7 team. So I'm kind of right in the middle. I think the schedule, there's a couple games on the schedule that I think really will determine which path Michigan takes, starting with the Washington game in week 2.
Mm-hmm.
If you beat Washington, I think that schedule sets up for Michigan to have a really nice start going into October when you have Wisconsin and the trip to Nebraska to start off October. But I do think that there's the potential there for Michigan to get off to a really good start. But if you lose to Washington in week 2, then you've got some tough Big Ten games looming, and that really puts the season on a different path. So yeah, check back in 3 or 4 weeks, and I think we'll have a much better idea of where this thing's going.
Oh, I absolutely think you're right on that one. With us today on our Game Day segment, as we continue our previews of the fast approaching opener with Western Michigan, is in beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic. Austin, always a pleasure having you with us on the show. We thank you for being so generous with your time, and look forward to that next visit once we tee it up.
Sounds good, Mike. Great to talk to you.
On Quick Hits today, as you heard Austin say, getting information on injuries, progress, or really anything else is very hard right now. We are getting weekly pressers from Jim, his staff, and an occasional player interview, and I'm okay with all of that. All we really want to see is this team take the field against Western Michigan and play. The Western game might not tell us much, but week 2 against Washington will certainly give us an idea of what we can expect from Michigan football this year. We'll be back next week with our 4th and final preview of the season. After that, it's time to tee it up. So I hope you'll join me again next week. Remember, our free show app is available from both the iTunes and Google Play stores. You can also hear us on Odyssey, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Podbean, among others. That does it for another show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. And until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue.